Right now, I'm happy to welcome a Skype guest, Brigitte Amiri, Senior Staff Attorney at the ACLU Reproductive Freedom Project. Brigitte worked on the Jane Doe cases and is an amazing advocate for these young women. Brigitte, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, I'm clearing your
Thank you for being with us, Brigitte. Can you tell us a little bit about Jane Doe and similar cases? How did you get involved with them?
So actually, we got involved in the Jane Doe case because we got a call from Jane's Due Process in Texas. And I think you have already talked to Tina Hester, who's the executive director, or you will be talking to her later today, because one of the attorneys in their network was helping one of the minors in the Office of Refugee Resettlement Custody seek a judicial bypass to get a court order to allow her to consent to her abortion on her own without having to get the consent of her parents and to keep her abortion confidential. And we received a call saying that this minor was going to be prohibited from accessing any abortion-related appointments because the Trump administration basically dictated that they wanted the shelter not to transport her for any abortion-related appointments, and they also didn't want anyone else to transport her either. So effectively, they were going to hold her hostage to prevent her from accessing abortion. That's how we got involved in this immediate case. But I've been investigating the Office of Refugee Resettlement and their obstruction of access for abortion for unaccompanied minors for about 10 years. It has really just come to a head with this administration and how blatant and brazen they have been in their attempts to try to coerce young women to carry their pregnancies. And when that fails, to just block them outright from accessing abortion.
Right. Thank you so much for breaking that down for us. While respecting the privacy of Jane Doe and the others who sued the government, can you tell us a little bit about them? What are their circumstances?
So generally, unaccompanied minors are minors that come to the United States without their parents. They are often fleeing horrific circumstances in their home countries, abuse, torture, violence, and also across the border. Many young women and adult women suffer sexual assault coming across the border. The rate of sexual assault coming across the border is as high as 60 to 80%. When minors then come to the United States, they're often seeking reunification with their family members here in the United States. But until that can happen, we are in shelters that are funded by the federal government and in the legal custody of the federal government. And so this is why the Trump administration thinks that they have the power to block their care, even though doing so is blatantly unconstitutional. These young women have, unique stories to tell, but the young women that have been involved in our case have shown tremendous courage and bravery to not only withstand, the journey and have the motivation to seek a better life here in the United States, but then when they sought an abortion and faced pressure from the government to try to coerce them to carry their pregnancies to term, that they stood up and they continued to demand access to abortion. And even though they knew that the federal government held their immigration status in their hand. So their bravery and courage is so remarkable and so amazing. And I am humbled and honored to be able to represent them in court.
Yeah, the amount of obstacles that were presented to them is, it's unthinkable. And the fact that these young girls are having to do that when no one who seeks an abortion should ever have to go through that really tells us a lot about the state that we're in. So my next question is, what was the process of suing for Jane to have her abortion?
It was intense, to say the least. With all of these young women, we are racing against the clock. No person should be forced to remain pregnant against her will for any period of time. And you're absolutely right that the obstacles that exist across the country for women who are not in custody of the federal government are tremendous in many places. But obviously, there's the extra burden here of being detained in federal custody. So it's a race against the clock. We rushed to court as quickly as we could. For 4 weeks, we were in court on an emergency basis. There were emergency appeals. There were briefs being written in the middle of the night by our fabulous team. And we were doing everything that we could as quickly as we could to make sure that Jane Doe would be able to access abortion and be able to obtain the care that she needed.
Right. Thank you so much for breaking that down for us again. It must have been such a unthinkable process for Jane and for the people that were working to help her. I know that you mentioned of her being in this vulnerable position, being detained by the federal government. So my other question is, why do you think the Trump administration is intervening in these cases particularly?
Historically, politicians who oppose abortion have always picked on the most marginalized. That's who they go after first. And, we saw this right after Roe versus Wade, when Henry Hyde would have preferred to who was a politician from Illinois, would have preferred to outlaw abortion for all people. But because he knew he couldn't do that because of Roe versus Wade, he instead introduced the Hyde Amendment and basically started these annual riders that get passed by our federal government that prohibit anyone who receives Medicaid for their insurance from having coverage for abortion. And this is a deliberate attempt by anti-abortion politicians to pick on the most marginalized among us and go after them for their rights. And so it is historically what has happened, and that's exactly what the Trump administration is doing now. They would like to outlaw abortion. Donald Trump has said that he would select justices that oppose Roe versus Wade. We know that there is a concerted campaign at the federal level to roll back access to reproductive health care. And this is part of it. And this is picking on the most marginalized.
Right. It's a very targeted attack, specifically to people of color too. And the fact that that and the Hyde Amendment are still something that women have to deal with there shouldn't be those kind of obstacles anymore. Right. Why do you think it's important for us to keep fighting these cases?
We have to for the young women who need access to the care, and that's really the driving force here is making sure that people are able to get the care that they need without obstacles, without shame, without stigma. And as angry as I am by what the Trump administration is doing to these young women, I am equally moved by the bravery and courage of these young women, and also of the amazing advocates, both here at the ACLU, across the country, Jane's Due Process, people who have dropped everything to help these young women, offers of support all over the country to help these young women, and that gives me hope that we can really make a difference here, and we will continue to fight, and we are doing everything that we can to strike down the policy that is in place now, so that there will be no Janes in the future in ORR custody that are seeking access to care and are being denied. But that fight continues.
Thank you so much, Brigitte, for being with us today and for all of the work that you do.
Thank you.